Hello everyone, it's your host, your friend, your boy, Jump Like the one and only here with another exciting video. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about how Perpetua is just DC Comics' new Synaar, or Sinner. I'm going to call him Sinner. Anyways, before checking out this video, you guys might want to learn a little bit more about DC Comics, so I highly recommend checking out the following videos that I've created to help get you up to speed. You'll want to check out 10th Metal Element X Cyborg 1 Million Hypertime DC Comics discussion. You also will probably want to check out Higher Dimensions 5th, 6th, and Beyond DC Comics discussion. And you probably would also want to check out Dark Knight's Death Metal, Connective Energy, Crisis Events, Dark Multiverse, and more. Now, those videos are optional. You don't have to watch those videos to understand this video, but if you do, you'll probably understand some of the concepts explained in this video in a little bit more depth. But I will try to, in this video, explain how Perpetua is essentially just DC Comics' new Synaar as clearly as I can. So let's give it a shot. So let's start by talking about Perpetua. So in case you guys don't know who Perpetua is DC Comics' current big bad. And there's a lot of stuff that we've learned about Perpetua. She's a six-dimensional being who created the multiverse, but was then locked away by other six-dimensional beings because she defied their rules. Now she's escaped her imprisonment and is planning to destroy the multiverse in order to recreate it in her twisted image. A lot of people are excited about Perpetua because she reveals new information on DC's cosmology and how the multiverse was formed. But what if I told you that DC already has a villain who created the multiverse, was punished for breaking the rules, and returns to try and take over the multiverse? Well, that's Synaar. Synaar is a DC Comics character created by Jim Starlin, the same writer who created Thanos. Here's a picture of Synaar. I actually really like his design. I was really surprised to learn about him. And to be honest, when you look at his weird, wrinkly face chin, he kind of looks like Thanos a little bit. I feel like the guy who created Thanos just really likes making Thanos-looking guys. I've actually met him before at Dragon Con. He's a cool dude. But let's continue on talking about Synaar. So, his history is inherently tied into the presence. And in DC Comics, Christian God is called the Presence. So I'm going to use the Presence and God interchangeably throughout this whole video. The history of Synaar is explained in issue number 6 of the Ron Thanagar Holy War from the year 2008. Essentially, God created Synaar to create the multiverse. Synaar did it, but then he hated how God would punish his creations. So then Synaar tried to betray God, and then God tried to destroy Synaar. Synaar survived as a single atom, and then eventually reconstructed a body for himself after years of hiding from God. He then went on a mission to try and become powerful enough to defeat and replace God as the rightful ruler of the multiverse. Sound familiar? Perpetua is more or less a modern, interdimensional version of Synaar. Now, when it comes to the debate of which is more powerful, because when I mentioned this to my girlfriend, she immediately was like, well then who's like stronger between like Synaar and Perpetua? And she was like, Perpetua is probably stronger, and I agreed with her, but I was like, but here are my reasons for why I agree with you. So Perpetua is a 6th-dimensional entity, while Synaar is a 4th-dimensional entity. This means that Synaar literally couldn't comprehend Perpetua's home dimension, nor survive within it. Because there's this whole thing in DC Comics where if you travel to like a higher dimensional plane, your brain can't comprehend that plane, so you go mad and you die. So if like Perpetua and Synaar were to fight, Perpetua could potentially go like, oh, hey, welcome to my dimension, and then Synaar would be like, what is this? And then that'd just be the end of him. Also, Perpetua is drawing infinite power from the never-ending crisis events that occur within the Dark Multiverse, so her power is essentially infinite. Meanwhile, Synaar's power must be finite because his whole character arc is trying to gain more power in order to overthrow God. So he's clearly not like an infinitely powerful being or whatever. Also, there's a comic where the Justice League kills Synaar. So he can't be that powerful, right? He kind of just died to these like non-six-dimensional beings. So if he had to fight a six-dimensional being, probably wouldn't end well for him. Now, a big question on my mind is who actually created the multiverse? Perpetua or Synaar? Now, I know a lot of you guys are probably saying, yo, Jet, there was this thing called the New 52 that happened in like 2010, 2011, that essentially said anything that happened before the New 52, you can ignore that. That just kind of didn't happen. And then continuity has kind of been building since then. And since all this Synaar stuff is from like 2008, why should we care about it? All this Perpetua stuff is happening like right now. So clearly, Perpetua is the one who created the multiverse, not Synaar. And normally, I would agree, since the storylines of many older comics fall out of continuity due to crisis events altering the timeline and the multiverse. But in this case, however, things are a little shaky. It's a little bit more complicated than that. I'll explain. See, in DC's multiverse, there's a place called the God Sphere where all the gods of the DC Comics multiverse exist. So here's like a map of the DC multiverse, and as you can see, you have like the Orrery of Worlds that has all these different like alternate Earths that exist. And then outside of the Orrery of Worlds, you have the God Sphere. So here's where like all the different gods exist. So you have like heaven and hell, where you would imagine like the presence would be hanging out in heaven. So see, if anything happens to the multiverse, to all these different like alternate Earths, it doesn't really affect anything in the God Sphere, because the God Sphere is just outside of it. This also means that while there are like numerous alternate Earths, like multiple different Earths, there aren't like multiple different heavens. Like there's just one heaven, and the presence is in heaven. So there's just one the presence. There's not like a ton of different versions of the presence. Meaning that the same presence who created Synaar back in like 2008 is the same presence that we have right now in like current continuity. So we know that even though the multiverse was changed by the events of Flashpoint, which triggered the New 52, that those multiversal changes didn't affect the presence at all. So that's when I hear you guys saying, well, Jet, everybody knows Dr. Manhattan, he changed time. He did a time travel thing. That's what Rebirth is about. DC Rebirth, Dr. Manhattan, he edited time, so now everything's different. So it doesn't matter if the presence exists in heaven, which exists outside of the multiverse, so anything that happens to the multiverse doesn't affect the presence, because time affects everybody, because this map of the multiverse is still fourth dimensional, meaning the presence is fourth dimensional, so he still has to obey time, so it doesn't matter. Well, it actually does, because DC Comics' whole thing is like, just fuck whatever we said before. So here's a clip from the New 52. This is from Phantom Stranger issue number 12, I think. I wrote it down. I don't know why I'm trying to get ahead of my notes as if I just know everything off the top of my head. It's not from issue number 12. It's from the year 2012. See, that's why we write these notes down. So, in Phantom Stranger number 5 from 2012, during the New 52, the presence is shown completing a feat that is beyond time itself by allowing a phone to ring while time is paused. So, there's a whole lot of shit. But essentially, the Phantom Stranger in the New 52, which the New 52 is within continuity, it's weird. It definitely happens. See, the continuity in DC is so fucked, but it doesn't matter. The New 52 is within continuity. This happened within the New 52. Phantom Stranger paused time so that he could have a discussion with the presence, God, and the Spectre. So this is the Phantom Stranger, and this is the Spectre. God's currently talking off panel. So God says, answer the phone while time's paused. And the only things that are supposed to be not paused by time are like the Phantom Stranger and the Spectre. And it's not like a pseudo time pause where it's like they're saying time's paused, but in reality no one's moving, but it's not the same thing. It's like the Phantom Stranger literally paused time. The flow of time stopped, except for them. And then God essentially goes, well, fuck it. This phone can ring, even though time's not moving. And then Phantom Stranger's like, that's not possible. I stopped time. And then God's like, shut the fuck up. Pick up the phone. So clearly the presence can just ignore time. You can be actively manipulating time, and the presence can be like, it doesn't matter. You know, I got AT&T. I can receive calls at any time. So this essentially means that Dr. Manhattan could have like gone back in time and like taken a shit like at the beginning of the universe. It doesn't matter, because the presence can just say, regardless of what you're doing to time, I can just do something else. So it doesn't matter that like any crisis events happen that change the multiverse, because God exists outside the multiverse. And it doesn't matter if any crisis event like erases or rewrites time, because God can say, fuck it, it doesn't matter. I also manipulate time, so I can ignore your manipulation and just make other shit happen. So essentially, the Synaar thing that happened back in 2008, which really shouldn't be relevant, is still entirely relevant, because it's a consequence of the actions of the presence, and the presence's actions are beyond any crisis event or time manipulation. So anything the presence does matters regardless of what's going on in current continuity. So we still have no idea who actually created the multiverse. Current comics are saying that Perpetua created the multiverse. Older comics are saying that Synaar created the multiverse. Perpetua is essentially just modern rip-off Synaar, but Synaar could also just still be relevant and still actually be the creator. So yeah, DC cosmology's fucked. Also, hypertime. So let's talk about that. So for DC Comics cosmology, there's this thing called hypertime, where essentially every DC story that's ever been told, it happened, and it happened in its own timeline, and all of these timelines intersect with each other. And essentially, at any point where the main DC timeline intersects with another DC timeline, there can be spillover, like characters or events that occurred in other timelines can then influence current continuity. So you could have read a book like 20 years ago where some random no-name character did some random no-name bullshit, and then suddenly it matters because there was like a hypertime intersection, so that thing that was erased due to like a crisis event, it didn't matter that it got erased. It still happened anyways. So even if you're like, it doesn't matter that like God created Synaar, who then created the multiverse, and it doesn't matter that God is like beyond time and beyond the multiverse, because current continuity says that Perpetua did everything. Fuck current continuity. That's a story that happened, and because hypertime exists, it still is like perfectly relevant. Because literally everything in DC is relevant. You can't say that any of it isn't relevant because we still have fucking hypertime. So Synaar could literally just appear like in the next issue of like Dark Knight's Death Metal or something, and then it'd be like, oh, Synaar's back. With hypertime, you could argue Synaar never even fucking left. So it's just weird. All of it's weird. What are your thoughts on all this? Did Perpetua create the DC multiverse, or did Synaar? Definitely share your thoughts in the comment section below, and let's continue this discussion on our Discord. If you guys like this video, make sure to smash that like button, favorite, comment, subscribe, and ding ding ding, ring the notification bell to be notified whenever we do these videos. This is your host, your friend, your boy, Jet Black, the one and only, logging out. Peace. Chicka da ga.